Welcome back to True American History, where we learn about the truth behind the myths we have been taught. Come along with us as we explore true American history. Long before Plymouth Rock, before the Mayflower, before Columbus ever set sail, this land was alive. It was shaped by hands, minds, and cultures that had flourished for thousands of years. Tens of millions of indigenous people lived here, from the cliff palaces of the Southwest to the mound cities of the Mississippi, to the vast Iroquoian and Algonquian nations of the Northeast. This was a continent of nations, not an empty wilderness. But that's not the story most of us were told. We were taught that America began in 1620, that a small band of humble pilgrims stepped into a wild, unclaimed land, that they founded a nation through courage, faith, and grit. That's the myth. The truth is more powerful and more important. This wasn't a new world. It was a deeply ancient one, with its own laws, trade routes, diplomacy, and science. Charles C. Mann, author of 1491, From the Olmec and Maya in the south, to the Mississippians at Cahokia, to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the northeast, indigenous peoples built cities, engineered landscapes, and negotiated alliances on a scale Europe had not imagined. Many European settlers couldn't even recognize what they were seeing. Where they saw forests, native people saw agriculture. Where they saw scattered villages, native people saw power networks. And then the stories began to change. Europeans began to call this land empty, savage, untamed. The process of colonization didn't just claim the land, it rewrote the past. To justify the conquest, they created a myth that America began with them. But to understand the truth of America's beginning, we have to start earlier, before Plymouth, before Columbus, even before the Vikings, because only by going back can we begin to move forward. 500 years before Columbus, Norse explorers crossed the cold Atlantic. They came not with conquest, but curiosity and survival. Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, set out from Greenland around the year 1000. Guided by stories of lands west of the sea, he and his crew found a new coast, a wild place of timber, grapes, and untouched shorelines. They called it Vinland. And they weren't just passing through. They built houses. They wintered. They left behind nails, rivets, and tools, still buried in the soil of Newfoundland. The Norse didn't discover America because the land was already inhabited. The Vikings met indigenous peoples who the sagas called Skraelings, possibly ancestors of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, or Inuit. These weren't peaceful meetings. There was trading, then conflict. Arrows flew. Blood spilled. The Norse, though skilled and fierce, were outnumbered. Within a few years, they were gone. Vinland was abandoned. For centuries, their story was buried under legend. But in 1960, archaeologists at L'Anse aux Meadows uncovered proof: Norse buildings, ironwork, and tools. The Viking story was real. But unlike later European powers, the Norse didn't stay. Why? They had no empires to build, no slaves to take, and no disease that devastated native populations. Their brief encounter ended because native resistance worked. So why is this story rarely taught? Because it doesn't serve the myth. The Norse came. They met a land already claimed, and the people already here defended it. What happened between the Vikings and Columbus? Everything. For nearly 500 years after the Norse left Vinland, indigenous civilizations across North America thrived, evolved, and expanded. European history often skips this chapter. But in this so-called forgotten era, the Americas were anything but still. Cities rose, roads connected regions, trade flourished, ideas moved like rivers. In the Mississippi River Valley, Cahokia, a city of pyramids, plazas, and astronomical observatories, reached a population larger than London. It was a metropolis of tens of thousands, with trade routes stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Farther west, the ancestral Puebloans built cliff palaces at Mesa Verde and massive ceremonial centers at Chaco Canyon, aligned to solar and lunar cycles. On the coasts and in the forests, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy also known as the Iroquois League, developed one of the world's oldest participatory democracies. These were not isolated villages. These were civilizations. They managed land through controlled burns, engineered food systems, stored seeds, cultivated knowledge. And then, the silence. When Columbus arrives in 1492, the story seems to start from scratch. But the Americas he stepped into were already ancient, landscaped, governed, remembered. So why do we erase the time between the Vikings and Columbus? Because no Europeans were there to write it down. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Indigenous peoples didn't need Europe to shape their world. They already had their own maps, their own stories, their own laws. To understand what Columbus really encountered, we have to understand what came before. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's how the story begins. But the story is wrong. Columbus didn't discover a new world. He invaded one. And that moment changed the world forever. His destination was Asia. But on October 12, 1492, he landed on the island of Guanahani, in what is now the Bahamas. He called the people he met Indians, but they were the Taino, part of the Arawakan peoples, generous, organized, peaceful. They welcomed him. He enslaved them. Columbus wrote in his journal, "They will make good servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all." That's the part they leave out of the school books. Over the next 4 voyages, Columbus established the Spanish model of colonization, built on resource extraction, forced labor, religious conversion, and total domination. The Spanish took gold, land, and bodies. Entire populations were enslaved in the encomienda system, forced to mine, build, and suffer, or die. And they died in staggering numbers. Disease, starvation, violence, and despair decimated the Taino, the Kalinago, and others. In less than 50 years, the Caribbean indigenous population collapsed. In some areas, it fell by 90 to 95%. What followed was not discovery. It was genocide, and it didn't stop in the Caribbean. Spain moved west, into Mexico, Central America, and Peru. There, the Aztec and Inca empires, rich in culture, law, and engineering, were torn apart by conquistadors and disease. The conquest brought silver to Spain and death to the Americas. But it also launched the most profound biological and cultural exchange in human history, the Columbian Exchange. From Europe came horses, wheat, smallpox, and steel. From the Americas came corn, potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, and gold. Ideas, people, animals, plants, and diseases crossed the oceans. The world was now connected, but at a terrible cost. This is what 1492 really means: the beginning of the Age of Invasion, the beginning of slavery, of empire, of genocide, and of the false stories that would follow. Discovery is clean. Invasion is not. But if we want to know how this land was truly shaped, we must tell the truth. The story we were told began with discovery, but the truth begins with devastation. By the end of the 1500s, the Americas had already been reshaped by invasion. Entire civilizations collapsed, millions were dead, and the age of colonization had only just begun. So when the Mayflower set sail in 1620, it wasn't entering a new world. It was entering a world already scarred by conquest. Join us in part 2 as we uncover what the Pilgrims really found, who was still standing, and what was already lost. The truth of Thanksgiving starts long before the feast. This is the American origin story, written in truth. If this video taught you something you weren't told in school, please support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, click like, and share it with friends, family, and anyone who needs to hear the truth. Your support helps us bring more history to light. Thank you, and God bless. These videos are brought to you by Indigo-Enterprises.